Checking the job over, Ivor? What do you think? Nice if we could salvage a small timber out of that top. They often break like that. You know, it's live there, but it's dead up there. That's why I had this tree marked for harvest. Same with that one. Dead on the top. I left all the live ones. These lakeshore trees, they get beat up by the wind over many, many, many years. So it is not the ideal place to be growing timber, actually. Pay big taxes and don't get much for good timber. But we're going to start over here and see if we get a whole bunch of white pine in here, and we'll take care of it this time. Keep it thinned out so it's growing productively. There are those two white pines. This one's got some rot in the center, but there's decent lumber around it. You can see the growth rings in the early days were super tight for some reason. And then it got some separation and it started to grow really well. And then in the last 30 years it's been practically no growth. This one, about the same. They were right next to each other, so they were competing against one another. Looks a little rough right now, but it's still a beautiful scene. There's a healthy top white pine. A nice looking red pine. There's a completely dead white pine next to that. I didn't even mark that for salvage. There's nothing left. We'll use that for a wildlife tree. And then there was this grove of red pine, and the red pine are all super healthy, but the tops were really invading one another. So I had to take one out of the three in here, and I took the one in the middle, right there. I left that one, and I left this one, and that was able to get a little bit of separation then between these crowns, and being released on at least three sides, they ought to be able to keep growing productively. I'd like them to get quite a bit bigger as long as we're going to keep them in the stand. There's a white pine down there. I don't really think there's any way to get to that. Did I mark it for harvest? I think I stayed away from that because it's just too steep here. And it's completely hollow, rotten in the middle. I don't know if you can see that. There's a cavity going all the way up. And then dead on top and completely beat up. I think we'll leave that for a character tree. Maybe someday grab it from the lakeshore on the ice. Let's see what the growth looks like on this red pine that we cut. Pretty consistent in the first years, and then I really slowed down. Really slow. I'm going to put my glasses on and try to get a count on that and see how old this tree is. At least I'll get close. I counted the growth rings on this red pine. That tree and the others around it are 200 years old. They're smaller than the white pine, and the white pine are probably 100, 105 years old. So my guess is that at the time of the first harvest in this area, just after the turn of the last century, the loggers weren't real interested in this red pine that at that time was actually pretty small, because it must have been suppressed, and underneath the white pine that they did harvest, and then they left the red pine standing. When they did that, the red pine took off, which many times the red pine doesn't do. I don't see that very often anymore. But the first set of growth rings was minusculely small for about 100 years, and then it took off, and then it slowed down again for the last 40 years. Anyway, it's a fascinating cross-section. I'm going to try to get a cross-section of that tree and let it dry a little bit, and maybe put a finish on it for illustration. But anyway, as fun as it is to study this history, we don't want to take 200 years to grow a tree of that size. We want to grow them to this size in 100 years, or even faster. I think we can grow white pine to this size in 80 years, but we have to give the tops room. We have to keep them healthy. It takes a lot of work to do that. Well, there's a lot going on right here. Many stories to tell. One thing I want to point out is that we've got super skilled operators here. They're trying to save as many of the ribboned trees as they possibly can. And I want them to take the non-ribbon trees, because I'm trying to get openings here, and I'm trying to get some disturbance of the soil, because we're going to grow white pine like mad here, and it takes that disturbance to do it. But we do like to have tree spacing as much as possible, but we end up with some of these open areas, you know, like that right down there where that skid is laid out. But here's a great illustration of how they approach a selective harvest using a feller buncher and doing whole tree skidding. So Eric's got a well-designed and thought out skid trail here coming from the lake all the way up the hill up there, and all of these drags of wood are laid out here carefully, super carefully, because if he doesn't start with them straight, they won't stay straight. The skidder can't straighten them out. So he's done a beautiful job here. And then anywhere where the tops are too big to basically fit through the hole without rubbing up against the save trees, he's taken some measure with the feller buncher to reduce that top down to a smaller size. So this may look a little bit rough right now, but it's going to be fabulous in a short period of time, like a year or two, if people can have a bit of patience. And the visual quality will return, you know, depending on your perspective. I think it looks great right now, but of course I've got a unique perspective. Now there's a mature white pine tree, among others, that we're leaving, but that particular tree, I measured it yesterday, it's 31-inch diameter. Why in the world do we need to grow a white pine tree that big, or why would we need to grow it any bigger than that? Well, most people never would. If you're cutting that into boards, you end up having to rip those 20-inch boards down into an 8 and a 12 or whatever anyway. We've got a machine that was designed to do that very thing. But we are making massive timbers also. Up to 20-inch by 20-inch square is the biggest we've made, and we'll probably make bigger than that someday. And not only that, we kiln dry them for up to 2 years. Well, we dry them for up to 2 years, and part of that time is in the dry kiln. And long too, up to 22 feet long so far, and someday we'll go longer than that. Well, anyway, it takes a massive, healthy tree to do that. And I think we're unique in being able to provide those timbers, and we're unique in growing trees like this. And one of the benefits is the visual quality and just the fun factor that that we get by having trees like that. It's like the Lost 40. It's amazing. Anyway, kudos to everybody involved in this project. It's just gone really, really well. And now the boys at the mill will have their turn to make great products for all you folks. And I think Ivor the timber dog approves, don't you, Ivor? You want to get up here with me? No, you can't do that. You'll fall through. I wanted to point this out too. As Eric is laying out his skids and is doing his cutting, he's avoiding entirely these areas where we had some success bringing back white pine regeneration, such as here. And in this particular pocket, we cut this hard enough, and other factors led to us being quite successful in our white pine underplanting, or retaining our white pine underplanting, and then we bud capped the heck out of this. Just like we did many trees along this whole hillside, but we lost 90% of them because many of the spots that you see here where we underplanted with white pine, they didn't get opened enough. And so we're opening them enough this time. And we're not going to have to plant. We're going to get natural regeneration because we've got those trees right there to provide the seed, and we've got a tremendous seed bed preparation. The soil is disturbed, but the soil is not compacted. That is just fantastic work. You can't do any better than that. And it'll be disturbed even more when they pull those trees with the tops attached, limbs and tops attached. It'll sweep the forest floor and really churn up that soil, but again, it's not going to compact it. These guys have got big skidders, but they've got even bigger tires on those skidders. And big tires, wide tires, means low ground pressure per square inch. In summary, another way of looking at what's going on here is these skid trails, and this is one that's finished. These skid trails end up being parallel, you know, some 50 feet apart or so, a little bit more. And to the trained eye, you can see these strips even many, many years from now by looking at the age of the timber and the configuration of the layout of the aged timber. But to the normal person, it looks like a complete natural undisturbed forest. Not right now, but it will. And so this there are ways to utilize conventional logging equipment as opposed to cut the length to do natural looking harvests, and that's what ends up happening here. We're going to have tremendous regeneration in this strip, and we're going to have a little bit older timber and that other strip. In fact, this old timber at some point is going to have to be selectively harvested again because we've got to get it off the top of this white pine that's in there. Right now it's providing a benefit by having a partial canopy, but that canopy is going to close up pretty fast, 100%, even though we've reached in there and picked a few trees out. But when it closes up again, it'll be about time to not only remove all or most of that canopy, but we'll need to thin out and provide spacing to the young white pine that's in here now that's going to be medium age white pine at that time. Looks good, doesn't it, Ivor? This is the main skid trail that all the smaller skid trails feed. So everything ultimately in this section is coming up this trail. In fact, I'll show you how that works. There's one of our individual strips, or skid trails. And then it's feeding this main skid trail. And I want to point out some of the steps that the guys take in order to protect the leaf trees. There was a double maple, and I ribboned one to save. I ribboned that for two reasons. That has an opportunity and a medium probability of turning into a high quality tree, just like that birch does. But it was a double, and this one was not marked or ribboned to save. And so Eric cut that, but he left it high enough that it's a rub post for when that timber has to make this corner. And it protects the tree behind it from being rubbed. And then he did the same at this hard corner. He left that ironwood because the tails, when he of the tops of the trees, when he makes his hard left turn, they're definitely swinging around. And look at how they're rubbing up against that ironwood. And think of how hard ironwood is. It's not going into the wood whatsoever. Took the bark off, but not getting into the wood. But he left that to protect this white pine tree. And that's been touched a little bit, but that's practically nothing considering how many trees have been skidded up and through here. And then on the inside of this corner, he's done the same thing. He left this birch, which is going to be harvested, and he could have cut that at any time. What's the point of cutting it now when he can leave it as a inside rub tree and get it at the end? So he's protecting that white pine, and he's protecting that white pine. These guys are really seasoned and experienced. There's other things going on here that I don't even think I can appreciate that they're doing all the time. Looking down from the top of the hill towards the lake, the visual impact of the logging is lessened the further you get away. We're getting enough opening, just barely, to be able to grow quality oak, which requires nearly full sunlight. And I already had done an inventory of the regeneration, advanced regeneration on the ground, and there's an example of the oak that's already present. So we're not even going to have to rely on acorns to get oak regeneration in here because it's already started, and now these are going to take off, and there's a lot of it in here. This time we're going to manage it from the very start because many of the old trees that we're harvesting now, like that one laying on the ground waiting to be skidded, has a fair amount of defect, interior defect on the butt log, and that is a huge cost to us, opportunity loss, let's say. You know, we really hate to grow a tree to 100 years old and then find that. So we have to manage the competition early on to make sure that these trees maintain health and vigor and productivity. And we might grow trees to that size in 60 years now instead of 100 years, but they're going to be healthy inside. And the same with all these other species. Some are shade tolerant and some are not shade tolerant, but they all benefit from some degree of release, meaning giving them room to grow up on their tops at different stages of the growth cycle, and then also giving them some relief from competition for nutrition and water down on the ground. So anyway, this is the start of a very intensive silvicultural management approach that'll be the next century of the management of this forest. Up and over the top of the hill, between the crest of the hill, which then leads down to the lake, and Highway 38, which is right over there, we're pretty much doing the same thing on top, except that we're not leaving very much paper birch, because up in this flat, it's not going to have a very good opportunity to thrive in a warming and drying climate. Whereas we left quite a bit of birch on the slope, because that's a north slope, and that north slope will help protect the paper birch from the warmer climate and the effects of the sun. You know, do I know for sure that that climate change is upon us and we're going to have a warming climate? I don't know for sure, but I definitely can feel the trend in my lifetime, and I know the science and the silvics of these different species, and I'd rather grow maple and oak up here and keep the birch down there, and it'll work out just fine.